Hello crafty friends, it's Donna here. I'm back in Japan and I'm sharing with you a card that I coloured back in Australia. I'm using the Protea Bouquet stamp set from Paper Rose Studio today and stamping that with fog ink. Any light ink will do, or if you don't have a light ink, you could always stamp something darker off onto some scrap paper and do a second stamping to get a light colour. I've stamped this 3 times. Once would have been enough if I was brave. Twice was certainly enough for me. The third stamping was really so that you could see the lines through the lens of the camera. The Protea I've chosen to copy is called Pink Ice. And if you're in Australia, this picture comes from the website of an Australian nursery, so you could even buy this one if you want it for your garden as well. I'm working with a very small selection of pencils, and not all of these pencils are actually the correct ones for the job. About halfway through the video, I remembered that I had a couple more, and so I grabbed those as well. Most of what I'm using are Polychromos. I also have some Lyra pencils that I picked up somewhere that are quite good as well. They're quite nice and soft. The Prismacolors that I have in these shots though, some of them are very thin maybe, and they're quite a hard pencil. They turned out to be excellent for adding details of lines, but not so good for the soft blending and shading. And I worked that out as I went along. Using the photo as reference, the petals at the top of the flower, where we could see the inside of the petal, had a little bit of a yellow tinge. Not as yellow as I've made it, but that was the colour that I had. And I think as long as I'm making some differentiation to the bottom petals, who's to say that mine wasn't a particularly yellow bloom? I've used lots of light layers to colour this, and I've chosen to use my white pencil to blend everything and press hard at the end. I wish I could tell you what this paper was. The pad is sitting in my desk in Australia. It listed coloured pencils as one of the things that it was good for, which is why I thought I'd give it a go. It's quite a rough paper, but thin. It's not a thick card. The thing that makes it quite good for pencils is that it has a lot of tooth. The paper is quite rough to the touch, so that your first layers of pencil don't cover the whole sheet. They sort of stick to the ridges. And then as you go adding layers, that tooth slowly gets flattened. Down the bottom of that flower, where we're looking at the outside of the petals, the colour was a little bit different. The petals had a little bit of a white purple sheen across the top of them and were darker towards the base. And so that's what I've done on those petals. As I've worked around the side of the petals, I've slowly added a little bit of yellow into each petal, so that there's a little bit of a blend going around. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't really follow my reference image for this. I just sort of got in the moment and had a play. I wanted a deep green for these leaves, but all I had were these bright greens and a teal green. So in the end I decided to do an undercolouring of browns and then add the teal on top. And I'm really happy with the final result, which is a deep rich green with lots of colour variation across the leaves. For most of the leaves, I used that teal green to add some shadow under the base of the flower and also to highlight the veins. You can do the veins in two ways. You can make them either darker or lighter than the rest of the leaves. But given that I was moving to Japan in just a few days, I've gone the easy option, which is to make them darker. To make them lighter, you sort of need to colour around them and leave them blank in the initial layers, and that will take a lot longer, even though it looks fabulous. Once I'd worked out where my dark areas were, the shadow where the leaf sat behind the flower, and also the shadow where it sat behind the other leaf, I've taken a mid-green to go around the outside so that the leaf is well defined, and then blended that through the middle. What do you think this is? Fern? Bracken? I'm not sure. I've decided to go with the browns, exactly the same browns that I used as the underpaint for those thin leaves, so that we'll have a bit of cohesion. And I'm colouring this with tiny little squiggly circles to match the design that I see on the stamp. I've also used the darker brown to squiggle through the middle so that you can see the veins. Note the use of the highly technical colouring terms like squiggle. The flowers at the bottom I've coloured in pale pink and pale yellow before going in at the end with the darker marker to make the flower centre and to add a tiny bit of shadow where one petal sits under another. I'm using the black stamp packaging to help me see where those are. because it's quite busy down there in the pale stamping, and it's much easier to see from the packaging. One thing you'll notice about me is that I always leave the hardest thing till last. I don't know why. It can destine a project for failure after I've put in a lot of hard work, but I was really scared of colouring this middle section. Looking at the reference photo, I can see that there's a very fine purplish sheen to that white, and so I've done a little bit of an undercolouring of pale colour, and then using a purple that I have, which is not quite the same but is similar to my reference image, I'm adding in the individual lines of the stamens maybe? I'm working from the outside in so that each of my strokes can come to a fine tip in the middle. That's why you see me turning the paper so much. Once I got to the very centre, I did do a little bit of work from the centre out, just to make it really nice and dark in the centre to match the reference image. Finally, I just need to make that centre recede down into the petals. And the way that I'm doing that is adding a little bit of shadow all of the way around. As I add shadow, things are going to fall back deeper and darker. And this just helps the flower look a little bit more 3D. I didn't wreck it. Finally, I'm just going to quickly add a sentiment and mount this up to make a card. I'll cut the panel with a stitched rectangle die and add it to a card base. The sentiment comes from a little stamp set called Happy Birthday Thanks, quite obvious when you see it, and I'm going to stamp the Happy Birthday right across the image. That coloured pencil underneath won't muck with my ink, which is Versafine Onyx Black. I'm just stamping it once onto some gridded paper to make sure that I've got it nice and flat, and then I'm going in with the real thing. I'm doing 2 layers of stamping, but pressing really lightly. You can see I'm just running a single finger across that image. With the thinner stamps, and especially with sentiment stamps, if you press too hard, you can end up squashing the stamp onto the paper and getting a little bit of a funny halo around your stamping. Finally, I auditioned a few colours for background paper, decided on the burgundy, and layered it up. I hope you've enjoyed this card. I'm going to leave you with some close-up photos. Feel free to like and subscribe and to follow along for more cards. Bye for now.